Okay, today I want to discuss an issue that's been bothering me for a very long time, basically the entire lifespan of the channel since I got started on YouTube, and that issue is tech demo marketing in the video game space. I'll go over a bunch of different examples later on, but for right now, the short version is this. Over the past 20 or so years, a trend has developed in the video game industry where instead of using actual gameplay to showcase a product, studios and publishers will often put together what's called a vertical slice in some cases, or a tech demo in others, which is then advertised as if it were actual gameplay, sometimes by omission or clever editing, but other times they just flat out make the claim. Here and there, you'll notice bits and pieces of qualifying language, such as all the footage was captured in-engine, or things like that. But the purpose behind the practice is to make as many people as possible think that the footage they are seeing is the actual game, whether or not the game even exists at that point in time. On the one hand, I understand that advertising something which is just not complete yet probably requires a fair bit of estimation. I've witnessed the video game development process up close many times in the past, and it's abundantly clear that things change or evolve over the course of years. But on the other hand, the practice of putting something together that looks like a finished product, plays like a finished product, at least on screen in front of the audience, nobody's actually playing, and even sounds like a finished product, with voice actors impersonating real players as if what's happening is legitimate gameplay, that's where the line starts to blur between advertising, marketing, and just outright lying. I'm not making the claim right now that every studio is intentionally deceptive when they do this or anything similar, although some of them certainly are. I'm making the claim that the process itself is deceptive and almost exclusively creates a scenario of disappointed expectations, nothing else. Let's get to the examples. Obviously, the catalyst for why I'm talking about this today, as per the title, is the Witcher 4 tech demo, which was revealed a couple of days ago. But first, I think we need context on just how often the concept itself gets abused. A little bit of backstory. Way back in the day, this channel officially got started because of a particular video game, Tom Clancy's The Division, which is another one of my examples, but I'll get to that later. Right around that same time, a little before actually, but close enough, right around that same time, another game came out, one of my all-time favorites as well, and hyper-relevant for today, and that game was Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, to this day, is one of my favorite RPGs. I have Witcher posters in my studio, I have replica Witcher swords that were given to me by a channel sponsor, and I've been a fan of the Witcher universe for about 2 decades, for a multitude of separate reasons. However, if we're talking about the practice of overhyping expectations, all the way back in 2013 and 2014, Witcher 3 is a pretty obvious place to start. The game is amazing. I don't personally care about the fact that this happened as much as other people might, but it's pretty undeniable that the visual quality was downgraded. Things like draw distance, detail, smoke, etc., all of which were markedly different in the final product, led some people to believe that they were misled by the studio. CD Projekt Red claimed that the footage was being showcased on a base Xbox One, which was certainly hard to believe at the time and still is today, and continued to deny that any sort of downgrade ever took place until like a week before launch, I think it was. Once again, just to be clear about this, it's one of my favorite games ever, which holds up extremely well even today for a lot of reasons. But the point was that this demo in air quotes, showcased the maximum capabilities of their engine, not necessarily what the game was or would ever be. It's a mild example, to be sure, but that's why it's the starting point. Each consecutive example after this sort of raises the bar or rises in severity. Witcher 3 was 2015, but 1 year earlier, 2014, this time from Ubisoft, we had a game called Watch Dogs. In my opinion, Watch Dogs was an interesting concept, obviously, but if you want to talk about graphical downgrades or advertising something because it looks good, not because it's real, Watch Dogs would be a pretty big step up from The Witcher 3. See for yourself right now. I don't think anyone objectively looks at this footage and sees anything other than deception. What they showed versus what would eventually exist feel like 2 entirely separate games. I don't know if I could even list out all the different aspects that were tremendously downgraded, but the point I'm trying to make is that the concept itself is deceptive. If you make supposed gameplay footage at the peak capability of the engine that you're using, and then try to make a full game to meet those expectations afterwards, you are inexorably setting yourself up for some degree of failure. You might sell more copies because of that, but the most likely outcome is that at least some of your audience feel deceived, because they were deceived. Let's move on to The Division, also Ubisoft. The Division, like Witcher 3, is one of my favorite games of all time. The Dark Zone concept that they used was fantastic. The player versus player dynamics, gearing process, and build potential especially were incredible. and broken at times. But regardless of its flaws, and there were many flaws, at least for me, the game was bottled lightning. It really was. However, if you compare the final product to what they showed at E3, well, once again, we have a spectacular downgrade. Entire gameplay features, map sections, and core aspects of the world were completely different because they were building something to generate hype instead of communicating honestly. What's more, this was one of the bigger examples where they had voice actors pretending to be players, which goes a couple steps further because it wasn't just about showing the peak possibilities of the engine, it was also about making people think it was real gameplay. Like I said before, this is a trend, so let's jump ahead now. 2019. In 2019, from Electronic Arts this time, we get a game called Anthem, which is yet again an even more egregious example if we're talking about tech demos being held up as actual gameplay. Anthem was an interesting concept, maybe, but thanks to reporting done by Jason Schreier in the aftermath, we now know that Anthem was a deliberate lie. What they showed didn't really exist, and would never truly exist, because it wasn't about showcasing what they had, it was about showcasing the most exciting thing they hoped they could sell if, and only if, they were capable of building it. Once again, entire aspects of the gameplay model shown were illusory, despite having a voice-acted gameplay reveal that tried as hard as possible to obfuscate that fact. EA would eventually shut down development post-launch, and the game was universally panned by critics, because they sold hype, not reality. And this is where the trend officially starts to turn, I guess, toxic. You could argue that maybe it got that reputation after titles like The Division or Watch Dogs, but the idea of being shown gameplay and having that gameplay not actually be gameplay at all really seemed to accelerate after Anthem. Let's go back to CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 was an unmitigated disaster. That's not to say that the game isn't in a tremendously better place now, or that the Phantom Liberty DLC that they offered wasn't a phenomenal piece of content, because it was. But Cyberpunk 2077 at launch was a complete shit show. The massive gameplay reveal that they did simply did not match up with reality. And once again, it was clear that the effort to showcase an over-the-top, polished extreme had been placed above any desire to be truthful or accurate. Here's an actual quote from the gameplay trailer. "We've greatly enhanced our crowd and community systems to create the most believable city in any open-world game to date." End quote. But if you spent 15 seconds on YouTube post-launch, you'd immediately realize that even if this game came out 10 years prior, it still wouldn't even have come close to that expectation. Cyberpunk 2077 rightly became an industry meme. The level of dysfunction in the city was comedic, for lack of a better word. The idea that this was the most advanced anything was completely asinine. Spawning systems, NPC routines, basic navigation, etc. Practically everything was broken, and while yes, they greatly improved the experience over time, tremendously I might add, to a position where I would now wholeheartedly recommend the game to anyone who might be interested. Today's video is about tech demos, vertical slice marketing, and the idea of selling something you can't even actually make or don't have yet. I want to be clear on something. The trend of using engine footage that doesn't actually represent a real product, or at best represents a fragment of a product that you can't replicate across the rest of the game, isn't just isolated to major publishers. EA, Ubisoft, CD Projekt Red, these are big names with big budgets. But the concept of using something that doesn't really exist, but kinda maybe sort of exists in theory, to sell a full product, yeah, that trend has been fully normalized. The best possible example I can think of would be a game called The Day Before, from a small studio called Fantastic, which was a beautifully sculpted gameplay reveal, oddly reminiscent actually of The Division, complete with fake voice acting, brilliant graphics, and all sorts of compelling features, only to find out that they literally faked all of it. The actual game wasn't even really a complete game. It was officially classified as a scam, and the studio basically ran away afterwards. But once again, the idea of showing something that isn't real, making it look as good as you possibly can, and then trying to maybe get close to those expectations afterward is an industry norm. Personally, I think it's backwards. Tech demos and vertical slices sculpted to achieve maximum results at the peak of the engine capabilities almost guarantees a downward trajectory with under-delivery on expectations. If you make the absolute peak possible demonstration at a small scale with over-treatment of every possible asset in that smaller confined space, you set the bar with an impossible height, obviously. And yet, that's what these studios are doing, including, so it would seem, unfortunately, The Witcher 4. Witcher 4, which was recently unveiled with a tech demo, not a gameplay showcase, looks to be doing the exact same thing. At least they're accurately stating what it is this time, because it's not in fact gameplay, but that doesn't stop half the video game reaction community from inaccurately referring to it as gameplay, which I have a sneaking suspicion that CD Projekt Red is perfectly fine with. See, you don't make something which is as close to gameplay as possible and then show it in a format where it looks like someone is plausibly physically playing, so that you can accurately inform the customer that none of what they're seeing is real, or fully indicative of the final product. You do that when you want them to think this idealistic version of what you haven't even fully made yet is real, so that they pre-order. It's just totally backwards. Some of the greatest gaming success stories ever are born when expectations are spontaneously exceeded, or better yet, when there's no expectations at all. Buying something and then experiencing that feeling of, wait a second, this is even better than what I thought it would be, is phenomenal. But it's the precise opposite of what the industry has now cultivated. It is shockingly normal to overpromise and underdeliver. That's like the main format that they have, because they specifically do it on purpose. Genuinely think about it. If I have to paint an entire mural, let's say I'm physically artistic and I get hired to paint like a mural across a big city wall, and I spend 6 months of my time on a little corner, like a 2x2 foot section, with crazy detail, perfect color schemes, little bits of texture, everything you can imagine, but nothing else on the wall exists, because I'm going to show that little tiny corner to a bunch of people beforehand and sell tickets that way. If I spend a disproportionate amount of time, money, and effort on a relatively small section of the overall product, pushing it to an unachievable level compared to the rest of the final thing, and then I show it to everyone as if it's indicative of what everything will eventually look like, that is fundamentally deceptive, and yet that's what practically the entire industry does. Witcher 4 sadly appears to be doing the exact same thing. That's not to say it won't potentially be an amazing game, but in a statement to VGC, CD Projekt Red acknowledged that what they're doing is showcasing, quote, the cutting-edge technology powering The Witcher 4, but not The Witcher 4 itself, end quote. Except you know that most people watching this think that they're witnessing the actual Witcher 4 game. Video game engines are capable of crazy things, well and truly beyond what the final product from an individual studio ever looks like or could ever look like. The Division, as an example, used to be based on the Snowdrop engine, which can probably do crazy things that none of us have ever seen. It's proprietary, so we don't have like that much information on it. But when you are then forced to make a product that functions under a certain set of guidelines, with PvP and damage and loot and general balancing, suddenly the idea of let's make a character slow walk through a set of pre-scripted events in the most beautiful way possible becomes a lie, because you can't make the rest of the game work like that, and you never could in the first place. It's totally backwards. The video game industry has a problem because they've normalized high initial expectations and lower eventual outputs. They do it for a variety of reasons, namely profit, I would assume, but that doesn't make it okay. Over and over, we've seen developers and publishing companies overhype and underdeliver because they use tech demos and vertical slices to sell the idea of a finished product, knowing full well that they likely cannot make the final product with that standard, but they do it anyway, and I have a horrible sneaking suspicion that the same exact thing is happening right now, today, with The Witcher 4. Yes, this time they're being a little bit more careful with the verbiage, I guess, but they can get away with that because a large number of people who see this content will just default assume that's the game, which in my opinion is specifically what they want to have happen. I can't personally make a huge impact on this, but the video game industry should stop, or at the very least substantially limit, their tendency to do this. Otherwise, we'll continue to have downgrades and disappointing launch day conditions for practically all major high-profile releases, even for products that otherwise would have been extremely well received. I hope I'm wrong. I hope The Witcher 4 ends up with accurate advertising, but I tend to get annoyed now witnessing these sculpted tech demos and falsified expectations. I don't care what your engine can do with an on-rails perfectly crafted little snapshot. I could not give less of a shit what you can sculpt with no legitimate surrounding gameplay systems. It does not matter, it's less than matters, like it's zero, negative value, what the Unreal Engine 5 can theoretically do or look like, because games basically never achieve the full capabilities of any engine. So why should we get hyped for something that has no bearing on the actual product whatsoever? At the end of the day, the gaming industry needs to learn that accuracy is more appreciated than hype. Just because it's commonly accepted to do something doesn't make it a good idea, and it certainly doesn't make you a favorite in the consumer industry. But Yeah, that's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. A special VPN deal, locals and Patreon for monthly memberships, merch, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.